Welcome to the Theory of Nothing podcast. I'm your co-host, Brian Wiora.
I'm your co-host, Chris Keene.
I'm your guest, Daniel Lobell. Hello.
We're very excited for today. I'll put it like this. I don't know if I've ever been as excited about anything ever.
We can tell.
as this podcast. Today, we're going to discuss the theory of the Beatles here on the Theory of Nothing podcast. Before we get there, though, Daniel is our special guest today.
Hello.
Very excited about having you here. Daniel, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
And why don't you just tell our audience of 10 million people what a little bit about yourself?
You know, they might be. You know, that's the cool thing, because these things live on, and this may very well, you may be laughing at 10 million, but it might be 20. You know,
I think if you're being conservative, it's 20. I think we're getting to 50.
I think it could be more.
Yeah.
What you don't understand is in Brian's mind right now, it's 20.
It
Like,
may as well,
he's
that's how you
convinced.
got to think, though. Like, you know,
Yeah.
I really kind of believe that. Like,
Yeah.
you got to think it that way, and then you get there. You
Yeah.
know?
That's true.
But you know, it's like, you know, you work towards whatever you're working towards. So
Yeah.
if you're working towards, you know, 20 million, that's what you get to, you know?
For sure.
So the question for me was what? I'm
Just
sorry.
tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, how are you? I am a human. I'm a comedian. I'm originally from New York. I live out here in LA. I've been doing comedy forever. I've been podcasting since 2004. I love the Beatles. My favorite band ever.
Nice.
And my first concert ever was Ringo Starr and his all-star band at Jones
Nice.
Beach.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
And I've never met a Beatle, but I did just interview this woman, Frankie Lee, on my podcast, which is called We Think It's Funny. And it came out today, and she was Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager's personal secretary. So I'm super stoked about that. And I did interview Sean Lennon once, and I blew it because I pissed him off, and I'm a huge fan of his, so that was upsetting for me. But
You pissed him. Do you want to talk about it or no?
sure, yeah. I mean, here's what happened. I'm a huge Sean Lennon fan, legitimately. Like, not just because he's a Lennon, but he's an amazing artist, you know. And I discovered him because he's a Lennon, but I'm still a big fan of his. And so I wrote him, and he said, "Yeah, I'll come on your show." This is many years ago, and I was so excited. And the first half of the interview went really well. So much so that we went to break, and I told him, like, you know, I'd love to have Yoko on. He's like, "Yeah, my mom would love this. I'll totally ask her to do it. Why not?"
Oh, wow.
And I was like, wow. But then I started thinking, I think I sound like a kiss ass on the show. I think maybe like people listening are gonna think I'm just like doing a kiss ass interview. I don't know why, because I was young and I was stupid and insecure. And I was also very into Howard Stern. And I was,
Okay.
and like in my mind, it was just like there was like this little voice of like, what would Howard say about this interview? Like it was. So I came back. I'm not blaming Howard, but I'm just saying like he was a big influence on me.
Yeah.
And then that got into my head. I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I just came off like a big kiss ass. Let me mix it up a little bit for the second half. And I was rude to him. And it was like one of those things where like I didn't even want to be rude, you know? Like it's to this day my biggest regret as an interviewer. And I've interviewed thousands of people, like, you know, and they didn't all go great, but you know, that one, if I could make it up one day, I would love to, but I don't think that's in the cards, but you never know.
Well, actually, and I do want to get into the podcast, but I think this is a good transition to it, because being a kiss ass of Sean Lennon,
Yeah.
being a kiss ass of the Beatles is not considered cool nowadays.
Right.
You know, Chris and I hang out with almost exclusively 20 to 27-year-olds. Is that fair?
Now we sound like pedophiles. Yeah.
I said 20 to 27,
Well,
not 10 to
I'm
12.
43, so
Okay.
I don't know what I'm doing, but
But it's interesting because I think people don't understand why there's so much revelry as it relates to the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
And it creates this conception where if you don't know anything about them and you don't know their history, if you don't listen to their music, you almost want to think they're overrated, or you can't. You're like, how could this band be this good? And so today, like, I kind of want to be the kiss ass to the Beatles a little bit, just like
Yeah.
you were with Sean Lennon.
Oh, now I'm much more secure, and I'm not worried about ever becoming Howard Stern. That ship has sailed. But I mean, like,
Well, how
I
are
just
you-
want to be me.
How were
so.
you rude to him? What did you?
I don't know. Like, I have to go back and listen to it, but like one thing that was mind-boggling to me afterwards.
Did you have him
Was-
ride one of those Sibian things? Then, all right.
I don't.
What's that?
No.
thing called?
Oh yeah, from the Howard Stern
yeah,
show.
yeah. That's,
Oh, yeah. No, I did not. But I mean, I did tell him, like, and this is the thing that I was just like, why did I say that? Like, John Lennon was always my favorite Beatle ever, and since I was a kid. But then I just thought, I wonder what will happen. You have these little thoughts in the middle of the interview, and you're like, I wonder what will happen if I tell him a different Beatle's my favorite Beatle. Like, how will he react if it's not his dad? Like, and I was just like, George Harrison's my favorite Beatle.
Oh my god.
And I'm like, I just think he was really the most talented Beatle. Like, I just said stuff like that, like, to get reactions, but I did get reaction. It was a terrible reaction. And I mean, like, just stuff like that. I don't know why. I just decided to provoke him a little bit. And I don't know what it was. I guess maybe some self-destructive gene that I had to work out in the years between then and now, but gene or thing or neuron in my brain, I don't know. But yeah, I definitely was much more, I would say much more. I don't feel like I'm self-destructive for a long time now, but I think I was at some point, and probably was because of being young and insecure.
Yeah.
I'm old and insecure, so I'm not.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone on camera saw Chris messed with this pillow for like 3.5 minutes.
Oh, yeah. Should I hold it?
Yeah, see,
Should I be pillow guy?
dude, you gotta make a choice now.
I know.
I feel
stick with
pretty
it.
secure at this point in my life. I gotta say, in terms of like who I am, like I feel very good about that. I'm happy to say that. Not that there's not improvements to be made, of
Sure.
course, but I'm in peak physical condition, and but no, mentally and emotionally, I feel pretty good.
That's great.
Whereas I was a storm in my head at certain points in my life.
I think Chris and I talk about this on the pod all the time, that we relate to that. And I think one thing I've realized about our podcast, Chris, and tell me if you agree, is that I think we're much more secure in our artistic beliefs than in almost anything else.
Oh, yeah. Probably just because I think about it a lot. I think about comedy and music and art or whatever a lot. So I feel comfortable talking about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about
Yeah.
then this particular manifestation of aesthetics, which is the Beatles. I've got a list of like 20 or so questions here. We'll see how many we get to in this hour here. So let's just start with a basic one, and this will be a way, actually, Daniel, maybe we start with you, of getting to know you a little bit better, which is how did you get into the Beatles?
Okay, so I grew up pretty sheltered, I would say, in terms of I was Orthodox, grew up Orthodox Jewish, went to yeshiva, and did not have much exposure to pop culture at all. And the first album I ever got was Billy Joel, River of Dreams.
Oh, wow.
My mom bought it for me, and it was the first like secular music that I'd ever heard that wasn't like Jewish music. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I became obsessed with Billy Joel. And I'm like, who is this? And I'm like, who are there others? Like, and my mom's like, yeah, there's a lot of great music out there. You gotta, they weren't keeping me from it on purpose. My parents are both pretty, into pop culture and music and stuff, but it just didn't present itself to me. And there was no internet, there was, whatever albums you had is what you had. And
yeah.
Anyway, I bought a Discman, like the original Sony Discman, like the kind that you bump it a little bit and it totally messes up. And I was like, I got to get my first CD for the Discman. I was in Manhattan, and they had a street fair where they'd closed off, I think it was Lexington Avenue, and there was all these tents with little like vendors, and one person had CDs, and I'm like, oh my like, I'm gonna get a CD,
Yeah.
you know. And so I walk in there and I'm like, I want to get some music for my Discman. And the guy's like, okay, what do you want? And I'm like, I think I'd heard the name the Beatles, and I'm like, is that a band? Like Beatles?
How old were you?
I definitely was not yet 13, so I don't know exactly, but somewhere between 10 and 13.
Mm-hmm.
I think. But anyway, I'm like, is Beatles a band? He's like, right there. Like he didn't even know like if I was messing with him or anything. Like looking back, I just remember him being like right there. I'm like, okay, that's a weird reaction, but okay. So I go and I'm like, oh, Beatles. Wow, that is a band. All right, I'll try that one. And I get they had the black Past Masters Volume 1. And I'm like, how's this one? He's like, it's fine. $10 or whatever. I'm like, okay. So I get this, take it home, pop it in my Discman, put on. I remember sitting at the kitchen table. We had a little, like, I forget what those things are called, like a nook, you know,
sure,
in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And I remember it was whatever it felt it felt really late at night, like the whole family were asleep. And I popped in this Beatles Past Masters Volume 1, and I start listening to it, and it was like, you know, like my pupils got huge. I'm like, oh my God, this is the greatest music ever. And I just like listened to it again, like as a child does, you know, again and again and again.
Yeah.
And then my mom comes in, like in her nightgown, like half asleep, and she's like, "You're still up?" I'm like, "Yeah." And I said, I call my mom Ema, which is Hebrew for mom. I'm like, Ema, do you know about the Beatles? And my mom's from Scotland, and she grew up in the 60s. She's like,
yeah.
She's like, yeah, of course I know about the Beatles. I'm like, I have their music here. I'm like, it's amazing. I'm like, who else is like them? Because I wanted to get into more bands. And my mom said, I'll never forget, she goes, there is no one ever like the Beatles. She's like, you'll never find another band like the Beatles. They are one of a kind. She's like, I'm glad you found them, and I'm glad you love them, but you will never find. And then I'm like, can we go see them? And she's like, no, unfortunately, they're not still a band.
Right.
Like, it was all so innocent and new to me.
Yeah.
And I felt like, when I look back at my life, it's so weird because it's a mixture of being a weird ADD kid and growing up in a religious bubble.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, you know, other kids who grew up in a religious bubble would not have been this way because they weren't as off as me.
Yeah.
You know?
Sure.
But, like, I just did not experience life as other people did. I just was somehow so oblivious to so much. And, like, I really felt like I discovered the Beatles. I really felt like...
But when you heard the Beatles, you didn't want to play music, or...
I did, but I sucked. I got a guitar, and I got lessons, but I quickly realized that I was incompetent at playing guitar. Like, and I was like, I didn't quickly realize. I stubbornly took a long time to realize it because I kept trying, and it was like, it's just like my brain and body were just like not, like, you don't have this.
Right.
It just, you don't have it. Like, I wish I had it.
Yeah.
But I just don't have it. But when I started doing stand-up from the first time, it just felt like, oh yeah, I have this. You know, I can do this.
Interesting, yeah. Chris, what about you? When did you get into the Beatles?
My high school friend got me into them.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's my first memory of really getting into them. Is I played in bands since I was like 12 or something like that, and my friend also was a musician, and his father was also like managed bands. And so I think he had a lot of influence musically from his father, who showed him a lot of older bands from the 60s and 70s. So he was really into the Beatles. He showed it to me, and I started getting into it. I think the first ones, I think I had like their first couple records initially, like the early stuff before hearing the later stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I think Please...
Please Please
Please
Me.
Please Me was, and with the Beatles, I had those.
By the way, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
just because you said that, and I started with Past Masters Volume 1,
Right.
which is the early stuff also.
Yeah.
It was kind of interesting because I think for both of us, we got into the Beatles as that generation would have gotten into the Beatles.
That's
right?
funny.
That's
Yeah.
funny.
So I think that's interesting. Like,
Yeah.
we went on the journey musically with them.
Right.
Yeah.
You know. Anyway.
And also a big thing at that time were the compilations of the time periods, the Blue and Red albums.
Yeah.
Those,
Right.
I think those might maybe. When did those come out? I don't.
The Blue and Red albums would have come out in the 80s, I think.
Okay.
But they were always like very well promoted
Yeah.
throughout. Actually, they might have even come out in the late 70s now that I think about it. But those Blue and Red albums were constantly being reissued, and
Yeah,
even
like,
today they are.
This was probably around when they were reissued on like CD.
Yeah,
you know what I
right.
mean? So it was like, yeah. But that's how I got into the Beatles. My friend in high school showed me, and I just loved it because I wrote songs, and they're obviously, well, they're like maybe the best songwriters ever.
Yeah.
I don't know. Are there? I don't know if there are better songwriters. It's absurd.
We'll
what they
talk
did,
about
but
this
yeah,
in a
we can get
second.
into
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
But that's. Yeah,
But I want to
it's-
hear more about Chris Keene for a second.
Mine's not as detailed, and that yours was amazing. Your story. Mine's just my friend in high school
Sure.
showed me, and I started listening to them. I mean, it wasn't typical for me to listen to them because we played in punk bands, and we weren't listening to like hippie music or whatever. You know what I mean? But yeah, I don't know. I don't have a detailed story of it. But I loved them. So I got all their albums
Yeah.
in high school. I have more to say, but I feel like it'll have to do with your other questions. Like,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, I always liked their earlier stuff more, I think.
Right.
But we'll get into that.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
that's an explicit question that
Yeah.
we'll ask here. It's interesting with your stories. Your stories feel opposite in a way. Like you had this world of knowledge of music, and then discovered the Beatles. You had the Beatles
Only in
almost
Billy Joel and that.
at Billy Joel's '93 album "River
Yeah.
of Dreams" and
Yeah.
the Beatles as your introduction to music. I
Yeah.
think that's interesting. So yeah, my story is kind of more similar to Daniel's in that. I was 7, and I'm a little bit younger than you guys. I was 7, and my parents got me as a birthday gift when I turned 7 the Beatles Ones, which was all their #1 hits.
Yeah.
And I became obsessed with it. And I said this to Chris the other night when we were on the phone, but every single part of my personality can be explained by being a Beatles fan. Every single part of it. Because what happened was I became obsessed with the Beatles. When I was in 3rd grade, I had a Beatles themed birthday party. And I was a 3rd grader in 2003. You know, like this wasn't I learned this at school kind of thing. This was I brought it to school. I used to walk around with Beatles magazines at school. And then so in 93, 94, the Beatles made the Beatles Anthology, which is a 9-part documentary.
With the new songs.
Right, with Real
Blackbird
Love
and
and
Real
Free
Love.
as a Bird. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I meant Free as a Bird.
Yeah. That was like, I'm pretty sure the only thing I watched from 4th grade to 6th grade was just that on repeat.
Yeah.
I could recite long sections. It's not like a movie. It was like a documentary. It's like
Yeah.
it's like hours and hours long documentary. And I had Beatles posters in my room and the lunch boxes and all of that stuff.
Me too.
And like I grew up, and in my mind it was 1965. You know, like it was interesting. And I was talking with my dad about this recently. I was like, why did you let me do this? Like this alienated me from so many kids, and it explains so much. Like I'm like, did I become an alcoholic because I was just this Beatles kid? And my dad said something really interesting.
Yeah.
And it really actually kind of changed my perspective on the whole thing. It goes, you try telling that kid to not like the Beatles as a parent. You go to that 5th grader who would cry. I used to cry when I'd get my hair cut because I wanted it long like the Beatles.
Wow.
In fact, this is something interesting. I one time cried because I was like, I'm never going to be white, and the Beatles are white. I'm never going to be white. And it was just...
Well, you should feel guilty about
Yeah,
that.
thank you.
That's,
That's true. I should. You're right, Chris. You should feel guilty about being Armenian.
I should.
No, but it was this crazy upset, and you and I were just talking about this. I saw Paul McCartney when I was 11, and I was crying during the concert. My dad almost had to make me leave, which is like the teenage girls,
Yeah.
you know, who would faint at the Beatles
Yeah.
concerts. But it was the happiest I've ever been in my life, I think, was being, because I've seen McCartney since then. It's not the same when you're an adult, you know. Seeing McCartney, and McCartney, I saw him in 05, was still great. I mean, and he still is today, but he was different at 65 than, you know, 85 or 82 or 83, however old he is now.
How was he at 64, Brian? How was he?
There we go. There it is. But that's really how I got into the Beatles.
I've seen him live twice.
Uh-huh.
Once was in 02.
Yep.
This concert. And the other one was about, I want to say, 12 years ago. Shortly after I'd moved to LA, my neighbor across the hall worked for the Grammys, and she got me into a private thing that the Grammys were doing for the Beatles, and it was like maybe 200 people, and we got to see Ringo and Paul, and Yoko was there, and Olivia Harrison was there.
Oh, nice.
Danny Harrison was there.
Whoa.
And Sean and Julian were there. And then a bunch of artists went up and did Beatles songs. It was really cool.
That is cool.
So, but yeah, I mean, going back to what you were saying, yeah, it was obsession for me too. It was like I became obsessed. And, you know, I've never been diagnosed as being on the spectrum, but I assume I probably am a little bit. And my wife is always like, oh, you are. So, you know, like I just get obsessed with things. When I like something, I become so passionately into it that I just immerse myself in it.
This next question here is, you know, why are the Beatles considered the best, and are they? And just as a little preface to this podcast, Chris Keene and I have a friend, actually, you know him. He's booked you on a show. His name's Nick Dravosla.
Oh yeah, great guy. What?
No, he's mentioned on every episode of this podcast.
We have to keep him mentioned. It's like a callback now.
Yeah.
Nick Dravosla does not think the Beatles are the best band of all time,
But
he's got
half retarded.
Yeah,
like,
he has
doesn't know
no.
what he's.
But he can't tell you why they're not, and he can't also tell you a band that's better. It's just a defiance.
He doesn't know anything about music, does he?
And so, but it's interesting because, again, this gets to what I was saying at the beginning, is if you don't grow up like Daniel and I, or if you didn't grow up in the 60s, or if with a deep appreciation of music, you might think, oh, this band has to be overrated, right? You might think this. So what I want to do is for each of us to go around and say why we think they are the best, if we think they are. I've got an answer that is maybe a little bit more technical.
Okay.
Maybe should I just start?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll start, and then we can kind of riff off it for a bit. So to me, I think there are three reasons why the Beatles are the best band from a musical technical standpoint. And we'll start with the fact that, for those of you that don't know maybe who the Beatles are, you wouldn't be listening to this podcast, but Beatles were a band from basically 1962, 1963 to 1970. Four members of the band: John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Ringo Starr, and produced some of the 13 albums, some of the greatest music of all time. Okay, we got that out of the way. So I think from a technical standpoint, the three reasons why the Beatles are the best band ever is, one is obviously the dynamic of Lennon and McCartney. You had Lennon, who was a lyrical savant, who was able to encapsulate politics, psychedelics, love, emotion, the human experience in 2.5 minutes lyrically and sonically as well. And then that complements McCartney, who has his own sort of version of that lyrically. It's not quite as, I think, profound as Lennon's is lyrically, but it is encapsulates a certain perspective on the human experience. But more importantly than that, I think Paul McCartney might be the most naturally talented musician to ever pick up a guitar or play the piano. Like this was a guy who wasn't classically trained, couldn't read sheet music, but was extremely. I know, Daniel, you want to say stuff?
No. I'm like, yeah, I'm agreeing with you. It's just like, yeah, I was just gonna add to it that he might be the best lyricist of all time as well.
McCartney?
Yeah.
More than Lennon?
Yeah,
Oh,
maybe.
that's
Wow.
crazy. All right, we'll get to
I-
that in a second.
Okay.
But I think the dynamic these two guys had, and not just the dynamic, and Chris and I have talked about this on other podcast episodes, but like the way they were able to push each other as well. You know, anything you can do, I can do better, etc.
Yeah.
They complement each other super well. And I want to get to later, like certain songs and moments where we think they do. But just as a general overview, I think that's reason number one. Reason number two is that you had a guy in George Harrison who, you know, starts as a lead guitarist and is solid at it. But by the end of the Beatles is every bit, if not, in my opinion, and this I think is going to ruffle some feathers, a better a better songwriter and producing better songs by the end of the Beatles than either Lennon or McCartney is.
Well, yeah, but there's an unfair advantage there in that he had a lot of time to make those songs.
Sure.
And they didn't see the light of day.
Yeah.
Whereas the other two had to start from scratch. So, by the way, when I told Sean Lennon Harrison's my favorite Beatle, it wasn't that far off.
Right.
You know, I love George Harrison, and some days he is, you
Yeah.
know, and some days McCartney is,
Yeah.
you know. And as a personality, I love Ringo, you know,
Right.
like, yeah.
Well, Ringo's the third reason. So reason number two is I think that Harrison became it was the only band I've ever seen that had three leads, you know, by the end of it.
Yeah.
And then but reason number four is you had a drummer in Ringo who was extremely technically sound. I mean, you know, his story of Here Comes the Sun is kind of amazing. It's 7.5 beats. So it's an extra, and to be able to play that is impossible. He had to play live when he couldn't hear the other musicians,
And
which
was he
is
left-handed?
really hard.
I think he's left-handed.
That sounds right.
Okay.
I should know this. I do know this. I just
Okay.
forgot it.
Anyway.
But here's the other reason why Ringo was important. Ringo was also important because he wasn't as big of a personality as these guys, and he also wasn't a crazy drug addict or alcoholic the way Keith Moon was, or Dennis Wilson was, or some of these other drummers, or didn't have a big ego like a guy like Don Henley did, or whatever. And by the way,
And
I
he's
love
so funny.
he's hilarious. I mean, all of them were funny.
Yeah.
But Ringo being an anchor personality wise for them, I think kept that band going for as long as it did. And I know it only lasted 8 years, and I've got a question here. What if it had lasted longer? But I think from just a musical standpoint, those would be the three reasons why the Beatles are the best band, along with, you know, constantly innovating, inventing the music video, inventing studio albums to a certain degree. I mean, there's a litany of things, but I think just from the band's dynamic, that would be why I would say they're the best.
Oh, dude, I have so many things to say about what you just said.
Go for it.
Oh, but am I supposed to say why I think they're the best?
Well, respond to my stuff, but also say
okay,
your
well,
stuff.
I think they're the best. Well, first of all, I find it interesting. I'm wondering if anyone even knows who the Beatles are anymore. Like Nick Dervosler, our friend, he doesn't know anything about the Beatles. He heard like one jolly tune one day, and he's like, "This is gay." Like that's his knowledge of the Beatles. That
I
is
love
literally
that a lot of this is based off of Nick's.
Well, this podcast is really about Nick.
It is about Nick in a lot of
always
ways.
about Nick.
It is about Nick, for sure.
This podcast can be called Analyzing Nick.
The Theory of Victor Voslo needs
Yeah,
to be an
that's-
episode, for sure.
No, the Beatles are the best in my opinion because the songwriting, everything you said. I mean, but mainly the songwriting. I mean, I don't think any band has produced that many amazing songs, especially in the time period. I don't even understand how that's feasible, but I guess they just had two of the greatest songwriters of all time in one band together.
Again, I would say 3, but at least 2.
You guys are insane. First of all, this guy thinks McCartney writes good lyrics. I don't know what we're doing. I'm just kidding.
I kind of agree with that to a certain extent.
You're both nuts. I love you.
I like
but-
let me
Good Day
just defend
Sunshine.
this
Really?
very
This
quickly.
is-
The simplicity of his lyrics is what makes it genius. Like,
oh, okay, I can see that. Yeah.
you know, if you want to ask me in terms of like complex poetry, Bob Dylan
Yeah.
is maybe my favorite lyricist in that way. But in terms of reducing things down, like the most simple, that's what's so genius about McCartney is just like these songs are genius and they're also very simple. Like when you look at them,
Yeah.
they're the most simple words and they're like, how is this amazing? And it is
Yeah.
because he's able to boil things down to their most organic and bite-sized form.
What
Lyrically,
song do you
I
think is like the best example of that?
Just name a song.
Well, okay, like "Good Day Sunshine" was brought up earlier. That's his song on Revolver. That's very
The lyrics of that,
simple.
Simple.
Yeah.
Simple, but effective. It's so crazy. Like, he can make the most simple words into an amazing song. So I think that's the genius of his lyric writing. Like,
sure.
Like, yes, it's not going to be like, incredible poetry. Like, okay, I understand the argument for Lennon or Harrison in that respect, but I don't know another musician who can write such simple sounding lyrics, and they're so genius. And it works like the way McCartney does it.
I think the songs are genius, but I don't know if I feel like the lyrics are. They feel empty a lot of the time, at least to me. Like, even like, I don't know, "Drive My Car" or "Good Day Sunshine." I mean, it's just like
I guess what I love about them is just how uncomplex they are. Like,
it certainly is a talent, and that's why he's such a successful pop songwriter. Yeah. But if you want like any depth, or he didn't really have depth.
So it depends how you define great lyricist. Again, like if you're going for depth and poetry, I would go right back to Bob Dylan. But
but I love McCartney when he does display some depth. I'm trying to think of some examples.
I think "Let It Be" might be as a song with potentially some depth.
Yes.
And of course,
again, so simple. Let it be. Let it be. Let it be.
Yeah.
Let it be.
Yeah. Whisper words of wisdom. There will be
"Here, There, and Everywhere."
Yeah.
Song,
That's by the way. There's a fun fact about that song. That's McCartney's all-time favorite Beatles song. Is "Here, There, and Everywhere."
It's a great
I remember
song.
him saying John really liked it.
Yeah.
That was one of the,
Spending each day.
Well, and that was very Beach Boys inspired. Oh, we didn't even talk about this, but the way that you and I met was you were wearing a Pet Sounds hat at Fourth Wall Cafe.
Yeah.
And I approached you, and I just wanted to talk. Everyone else in the friend group wanted to talk with you about comedy. I'm like, no, fuck that.
But I also referenced Band on the Run in my act that night.
Yeah, you did.
So
that's right.
So it was I think we had two things to talk about.
That's right.
That. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's interesting because the reason I bring up the Pet Sounds thing is because I think McCartney really wanted to be in the Beach Boys and do the Beach Boys thing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Brian Wilson really didn't want to.
Yeah, Brian Wilson didn't want to be in the Beach Boys. For sure.
This is interesting. So Brian Wilson is like he has a similar songwriting style to Paul McCartney, where it's like just these pop geniuses, right? But I feel like Brian Wilson has more emotional depth to him than Paul McCartney does.
Well, McCartney, okay, this is, I've heard this point been made before, but like McCartney lived a very uncomplicated life for being as famous as he was, It still is, yes. And McCartney might live to 200, by the way. This guy takes care of himself like no one else. But, in terms of like the scandals surrounding Paul McCartney, it's a short list. He was arrested once in Japan for having a little bit of weed. He's had a couple of different wives, but really had one for the majority of his life, and she died. Doesn't really have a lot of drama around him. Like Lennon's story is way more complex. George Harrison's story is way more complex. Brian Wilson's story is very complex. So McCartney, very intentionally, though, I think, lived his life because he could have done whatever. I mean, McCartney was at one point, and this is what's hard for people like Nature Vossler to understand, like, the Beatles were bigger than music as just an art form.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that to be dramatic.
That's by the way, was going to be my answer on why the Beatles are the best.
Well, yeah, you say it then.
Well, I was going to say, like, they covered every film, television, music, merchandising. Like, they were so all encompassing, and everything they did was great. And not only that, I was going to add that they took everyone on this kind of musical journey with them in such a short amount of years. They changed so much. They changed music so much, and it was all great.
Right.
In every stage of it was great.
Yeah.
So like, if you go from the early albums to like Magical Mystery Tour, you'd think that spans a really long amount of time, but it doesn't. It's like, what, about 4 years?
Yeah.
So
Crazy.
It's wild.
Yeah.
It's wild. They were wildly innovative, and they took chances and changed, like, so many artists. And even in the stand-up world, you see so many comics are doing the exact same act from 10 years ago, and like, people are very afraid to leave what works. And I've told this to friends of mine. Sometimes you could wind up in a gilded prison, of your art, because you just don't want to. It's so scary to, it's so hard to get to something that works,
Yeah.
and then it's so scary to throw it away and start anew. Which, in a totally non-braggadocious, because I'm not a person who's made it, you know, but I'm saying I have done that, and not in a braggy way, but just because I can relate to it, because I've thrown out my whole act, and I've thrown out my style, and I've done these things, and it's absolutely terrifying, and it's really, really hard. And for me, it took many years when I threw away everything to rebuild.
Yeah.
They did it in minutes. They were like, "Okay, we're this now."
Yeah.
You're like, "What? What? How are you? How are you? Like, who else has ever done that ever?
Sure.
Like, not even just in music, but like, who transforms that many times that quickly? It's crazy."
I think the Beatles have these moments in music that changed culture and changed society.
Yeah.
When George Harrison plays the sitar on Norwegian Wood in 65.
Mm-hmm.
Bum, bum, bum. When Tomorrow Never Knows comes out in 1966, no one had ever heard anything like that.
Yeah.
Like that kind of stuff. And it's that life imitates art thing. Like, the 60s are known as this very fast-paced time where the differences between 1960 and 1969 are massive,
Right.
culturally. But I wonder how much of that was actually because of the Beatles.
A lot, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think so. They set the tone of the culture. They were the biggest thing of that time.
Yeah.
So, I don't think they were following cultural trends, because they weren't. So,
Right.
I mean, cultural trends were being made by them.
Yeah, I don't understand why the world doesn't work like that anymore. We talked about this, I think, on the last podcast, or at one of the episodes, where, like, I was just saying, like, the way the music and culture, but especially music that is popular now, is like almost identical to what was popular 10 years ago or 20 years ago. It's like the same pop stars or hip hop artists have been famous the whole time. The music hasn't changed that much. And you just give me a great point, which is like 60 to 69, it's like totally different worlds.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
why our culture doesn't seem to change as much anymore? And I don't know if that's because of social media and the internet or what.
I would say it's because the music industry was, like, bands like the Beatles proved how profitable the music industry could be, whereas there wasn't that kind of big money behind music before that. And then they're like, "Oh, there's a lot of money to be made here." And then when these guys got their grubby little hands all over music, they started to say, "We'll decide the trends. We'll, push to the DJs what to play," and it becomes a pay to play. And unfortunately, I think the music industry I mean, there's still great bands out there, and there's still great music, but I think actually social media is helping this in a weird way, because people are able to find things that they wouldn't be able to find before that on their own, but they've really been, force fed crap. Society has been force fed a lot of crap musically, like farm animals, man, because like I feel like I'm like, the record labels, man, you know what they're doing? Like, but the big labels are, like, in a lot of ways telling everybody what they like, instead of people finding what they like, and they also control, like, the product a lot. So
Yeah. Actually, though, this gets to my next question really quick. We're all going to have things that we want to say more, and we can talk about more. But I guess, Chris, I'll direct this at you then, because you and I have talked about this, is how do you think your opinions of the Beatles have changed over time?
How have they changed over time?
Yeah. Like from when you first were introduced to them to now. And you can relate it to what Daniel just said too about culture and society changing.
I don't know if they have changed that much.
Oh, wow.
Honestly.
Okay.
Yeah. Like the way my thoughts on their music are the same, I think, from when it was 20 years ago. I still view them the same way. John is still my favorite. I don't know. In what way? Changed in which way? Just
Well, I mean, I feel like
um,
mine have, which is where the
okay.
impetus of this question.
Maybe you
but
start, and then maybe I'll understand.
it's a leading question because
Well,
I've got a great answer to it. So, but
no,
Daniel,
no,
go. You go.
Well, if you tell us about what you mean, and then maybe I'll understand more what.
Okay. All right.
Um,
Well, then, okay, maybe I'll go here, which is so it's interesting. As a kid, I'm obsessed with them. I think their music is great and all of that stuff. But as I got older, started thinking about them more philosophically and whatnot. I came to realize how much of the way I act and the things I think are because of the Beatles, which is related to what I said at the beginning of this thing. But like, for instance, Daniel brought up that they weren't just musicians; they were also actors, and they were great actors too. By the way, the Hard Day's Night movie is in Roger Ebert's 100 greatest movies of all time.
Magical Mystery Tour. It's really funny.
That's a fun movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Help is a fun movie. Like, they were great actors. They were great merchants. The only thing they weren't great at, which is related to the thing you just said, was owning their own record label. They started Apple Records and that thing ended up being a disaster, but everything else was great. But so it's interesting because in my life, another Beatles song. No, in my own, in Brian Wyora's life, but in my life, a great Beatles.
Brian's life, he's loved them all.
I've loved them all, as in all of the Beatles, yes. But I've actually gone and pursued a lot of different things in my life, I think, because of them. And my perspective on them is I actually, like, I'm a fan of them and whatnot, but I actually feel like I owe a lot of the way I've lived my life to them in a weird way. I feel closer to the Beatles, who I've never met, than I do members of my own family, which is a strange thing. And I've thought about, if I met Paul McCartney, I don't think I'd be weirded out by it.
If I met Paul McCartney, I don't know what I would say to him at this point, because like he's heard it all, right?
Yeah.
Like, what would I say that would be unique to tell him? I don't know. I mean, I guess I would love to have a conversation with him.
Sure.
But I don't have a good excuse, like,
Yeah.
Except that I'd like to, and I'm a good conversationalist, I think. But,
Right.
I think you'd tell him that George Harrison was your favorite Beatle.
Yeah, I'd piss him off, I'm sure. No, I wouldn't nowadays. That was young finding himself, Danny. But
Yeah.
yeah, man, I don't know. Like, I always feel like I'd get on great with Ringo. I would love to meet him.
It'd be hard not to, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he's
Have
an
your
interesting
opinions about
guy.
the Beatles changed over time?
Yeah, I mean, like I was telling you before, like I do bounce around between like which is my favorite Beatle. Whereas like when I was a kid, it was just Lennon. I had a giant John Lennon poster up in my room, not more than one actually, but the one of him in denim on his bed with the guitar on his lap. I had that massive poster up, and I mean, yeah, I over the years, first of all, like I used to feel like I was very Lennon-y, but as I've gotten older and stabilized as a human, I feel more like I feel more McCartney. Like I feel like a lot. I relate to him a lot more now.
Yeah.
You stopped beating women. You were like, I think
Yeah.
I'm more of a McCartney guy now.
I used to get mad.
My woman. We actually talked about that song recently, the getting better,
Yeah.
Oh, okay, man.
because I think that song is the best like encapsulation of what you're talking about here. Like McCartney says, it's getting better all the time, and Lennon comes in, it can't get any worse.
Can't get much worse.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. And then George Harrison, as I've been more spiritual in my life, I like playing his music a lot more because he was more into that. And that's also like they really, especially in the solo careers, they really kind of take you so down different parts of the human
were,
psyche, like, the spiritual side of you, or like the emotional side of you, or the, just, I don't know, like the rawness of songs like Mother, John Lennon.
Right.
Mother, you had me, but I never had you.
It's the opening song on Plastic Ono Band, his
Yeah.
1970 album.
Yeah. I don't know. I just felt like I didn't feel that way about my mother, but like that was a very emotional track for me, and I won't get into that all together, but like, just like it was almost therapy a little bit, that song. I'm sure it was therapy for him,
Right.
and it was a little bit therapy for me too. And then, by the way, while we're on the topic of solo stuff, this never gets talked about, I don't think, very much, but the posthumous album of George Harrison, Brainwashed, that Danny finished,
Yeah.
is a genius album.
Unbelievable.
And I love that album so much. And I over the years, always wind up finding myself going back to Brainwashed.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
I love that album, and there's the song on that album that I think is like the perfect George song.
Any road will take you there.
Any road will take you there.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
See? We're on the same page.
Yeah. That song might be like George's
May
manifesto.
not know where you came from.
Any
may not
road
know
will
where
take you
you
there.
I don't know this record.
May not
It's his
even
02 album,
wonder
so it
Okay.
came.
how you got this far.
We will be singing on this episode of the pod. We have to. You have to. If you're talking about the Beatles,
And
have
if
to
you
sing.
don't know where you're going, any road will take you there.
Dun, 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 dun. Okay.
That's been a mantra for my life.
It's a great George one. I love your encapsulation of those three though. That like John's the raw emotional,
Yeah.
McCartney for the cup of tea, the stability,
Yeah.
and George for the spiritual. I mean,
Yeah.
it's an oversimplification, but it is kind of true.
And Ringo for that taste of country.
I guess, yeah. Whatever he's doing, but Ringo's great, and we all love him.
Ringo's very important to the band.
100%.
Oh, yeah.
I'm glad you said that because, a lot of people say he's a shitty drummer and he's useless
Oh,
and
no.
stuff. He's integral,
Yeah.
like you said, because the way he plays to the song.
Right.
He's
Yeah.
not.
Any other drummer, like, I can't even imagine another drummer on those songs because, like, he drums perfectly for those songs.
Right.
Like, I mean, you want a drummer that's going to distract from those songs? With,
Yeah.
Like his... I think it's the perfect fit, you know?
Right.
But
That is, I love this point. Okay, and this like excites me, Daniel. So this is very exciting. Like to me, like John Lennon and George Harrison were not the greatest guitarists of all time. Ringo's not the greatest drummer of all time. McCartney might be the greatest bassist of all time, but who cares?
But what is that
Yeah.
greatest? Like to me, like no, I know
This
the
is
thing
your
that-
manifesto.
It is, I think, but like one of my I don't. Oh, okay. So, why is Ringo not the greatest drummer? I mean, he added perfectly to some of the greatest songs ever written.
Yeah.
Like those are my favorite drummers. That's who I think are the best. Dave Grohl was a great drummer because he was playing to the song. He wasn't like this flashy guy doing all this bullshit.
yeah.
But so anyway, I did interrupt you, so I apologize.
So, but here's what I want to say though, because what makes them the greatest band of all time is like the sum of the parts are greater than each part individually, right?
Yeah.
Actually, hold on, I messed up that expression. We might have to. I don't know if I want to mess up this expression on the pod. We might edit that out. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. That's
Yeah,
what I meant to say.
I know what you meant.
Yeah. But
I wasn't listening, so I just nodded. I'm kidding. Jesus.
listen.
I'm joking.
Like I got into this argument with Nick Drvosla. He's gonna come up because he and I.
He really is the fifth Beatle. if
He
you think
might
about
be.
it.
He might be the fifth member of this podcast, and there are only three of us here. But he and I got into like a really intense debate about who had better vocals, Robert Plant or Paul McCartney, which is
McCartney.
and it's insane and but of course he defends Plant. And here's my thing, like every like greatest, to your point, thing is a thing that takes away from the song. I think like you can say Hendrix is the greatest guitarist of all time. That's fine, but his guitar, like his solos, take away from the songs. I think. No offense, but I think it's true. Keith Moon might be the greatest drummer of all time, but Moon's drumming, I think, is the song. You know, like to me, this is your point. Is like there's not a single element of a Beatles song to me that takes away from the song. It's all like the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah, because they're like a songwriting band.
Right.
That's the focus. Jimi
Yeah.
Hendrix, I mean, I love Jimi Hendrix and he has great songs, but his guitar playing is a big part of what he does. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. And then Keith Moon, yeah, he's more complicated than Ringo or whatever. But then again, he gives the Who a signature sound kind of
Mhm.
through his drumming. It's very unique to him,
Sure.
I think. But yeah.
What do you think of Yoko?
Oh, okay? So actually, this gets to my next question. So I was just kind of looking at the questions we have here,
Yeah.
which we've actually implicitly answered a lot of these. But yeah. So thoughts on Beatles solo discography, and I guess we can get to Beatles accoutrements, which would be Yoko.
So to me, Yoko made John a much better artist.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think a lot of the attraction was how different she was
Yeah.
artistically. She came from this avant-garde, and John, I think, was dying to get away from the poppy thing and get into something more different and artsy, and
Yeah.
and Yoko kind of gave him that allowance to do that. And Yoko's like, all the Primal Scream stuff.
Yeah.
And then she, in a way, like, it was very freeing. Like, if you put Yoko doing those like that on the album, and people still are gonna get the album, you realize, oh, I have complete artistic freedom. That said, also Yoko, I think, had a lot of great artistic merit in her work. Like, some of the songs, like, I actually really like a lot. Like, Let Me Count the Ways, you know that one?
Yeah.
Let me count the ways how I love you. That's a really nice and sweet song.
Mm-hmm.
Was that on Double Fantasy?
I thought it was.
It's either on Double Fantasy or Milk and Honey,
Yeah.
which comes
It's
later.
like that house in the mountains.
Chris
we
is looking
heard
it up
Yeah,
for
I'll
us.
look it up.
But
By the way, how many people will sing Yoko Ono for you on a podcast?
this is like one
Yeah,
maybe.
It's like that first
I don't know if Yoko would.
summer we spent in Egypt.
All right, so
Yeah.
First of all, this is, and I'm about to say something that's not an original take of mine. It's from a friend of mine. But I think this is a really good point, and I've never heard it before, so I think it deserves to be on a podcast. Which is that, like, if Yoko had never met John Lennon, her legacy would have actually been like as a pretty instrumental avant-garde artist.
Yeah.
Her art is actually never talked about now, obviously because of Lennon.
Right.
But it's unfortunate that it's not, because in the art community, I think she would have been considered this pretty cool, interesting experimental artist. Look, I'm never going to turn on a Yoko Ono record for pleasure. It would be only for historical reasons that I would turn it on.
Mhm.
In the same way that, like, I wouldn't necessarily turn, like, if I want to look at paintings, I wouldn't, necessarily look at abstract art. It doesn't
Mhm.
speak to me. Personally, it is hard to separate her from John Lennon.
Mhm.
And at this, we're on a Beatles podcast and we're talking about her, right? Like,
Right.
we're not doing a Yoko Ono podcast and talking about the Beatles.
But do you agree that John became a better artist?
So
because
yeah,
of
I mean,
her?
and this gets to the question of, like, when were the Beatles at their best? When was each Beatle at their best? Whatever. Like, I would say Lennon did become better after meeting her. And I think if we want to give credit to Yoko for that, I think part of the reason why is because John did not feel competitive with Yoko. He felt very safe and secure with her. He
Mhm.
felt very enabled by her. It's kind of interesting the way that John handled other contemporaries. Dylan, he felt very competitive with, especially in '65 when Bring It All Back Home comes
Have you
out.
seen them drunk or
Stoned
back
in the
of
car. Yeah.
Kelly
yeah.
later said he doesn't believe in Zimmerman.
Yeah. You're right. I don't believe in Zinnerman on the
Yeah.
God song. Yeah.
Just believe in me.
I don't.
That's-
He says on there though, I don't believe in Beatles either.
Yeah,
right? Like,
I
so
don't
it's,
believe in Beatles.
I just believe in me.
That is a powerful song.
It's an unbelievable song.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's my as someone who's doesn't believe in God. God is a concept by which we measure our pain. That's an amazing. I like that phrase. But so on Yoko, like, I think John did become better because he didn't feel competitive. He felt very competitive with Paul, obviously. Felt competitive with Dylan. Felt competitive with Harry Nielsen, who I want to talk about later. Like he never felt competitive with Yoko, and he felt very safe with her. I think if we want to give Yoko credit, I think that's the credit I'd be willing to give her.
Okay.
What's your thoughts on Yoko?
I like her a lot. I think what you said is true. A lot. I think she gets a lot of hate from a lot of people. I always liked her. I enjoy Double Fantasy. I think her songs make it interesting. My favorite Beatles stuff is John Lennon's first 2 solo albums. Like, I think I like that. I know this is absurd, but
yeah,
I think I like them more than any Beatles album. Plastic Ono Band and Imagine. Yeah.
By the way, you must have seen the Imagine documentary.
yeah,
right?
Above Us Only Sky.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I can't remember if I saw that.
Did you ever see John and Yoko host the Mike Douglas show?
No, I've seen them interviewed on Dick Cavett before.
No, they took over a week of shows on the Mike Douglas show. I got this when I was a teenager.
Okay.
From I think it was Rhino or something, and I sent away from it, in the mail, and I got this 5 VHSs with a little book that it came with.
Amazing.
And they brought on their own people for the week. They took it over and made it the John and Yoko show. You would love this. You would both love it.
Now that you say it, I feel like I have seen it. It's just been forever.
They had George Carlin on
Okay.
during that week, and I was friends with Carlin towards the end of his life.
Yeah.
And I asked him about it, and I'm like, so what was it like being on the Mike Douglas show with John and Yoko? And he's like, I was on so much coke when I did that, I don't remember any of it.
Oh, jeez.
But
That's wild. My theory about John is that for his legacy, the best thing that happened to him was getting murdered for his legacy.
Wow. I don't know if I can go there.
So here's why. And the take might be a little offensive, and I apologize. But
Okay, let's hear this offensive take,
Yeah.
because, you mean like somebody becoming legend?
yeah.
Do you think he needed to be murdered to be a legend?
And in fact, it needed to happen in 1980. And the reason is, I think we missed out on a lot of bad Lennon 80 albums. A lot of really bad. Let me tell you, a lot of anti-Reagan albums in the 80s didn't age well. And anti
Do you think he would have been anti-Reagan?
for sure he
Yeah.
would have been. He was very anti-Nixon. But
Yeah.
not
Well,
because
Nixon was
but even-
keeping tabs on him and
Right.
and like trying to get him thrown out of the country.
right.
But a lot of
that was
people
pretty
kinda-
personal.
People kind of evolved, though. Like Neil Young even kind of evolved there for a little bit.
Sure.
Where they're
Lennon,
changing
though,
their politics and things like
We
that.
also missed the John Lennon 1990s rap album with MC Hammer that I promise you would have come out.
Joe Menente has a joke about this.
I-
Where he's like, I'm glad Tupac and Biggie were killed because we don't want to see Tupac on Dancing with the Stars.
Right.
Like,
but
yeah.
it would have been Lennon doing it, and by the way, throwing the N-word out like no one's business.
Oh, God.
Because he was already doing
Well, he
that
was
in
already-
72.
yeah.
What
Well,
what do you think Lennon would have looked like in the 80s
I don't think
and
that
90s?
Lennon was a party politics person. Like, I don't think that he was like, I think he was more reactionary to, like, even his politics are not, what are they? Like, don't have war? Like,
Well, that's a controversial statement these days, but
I mean, but I think he was much more of a free thinker than that theory gives him credit for, because I don't know necessarily that he would have continued to be political even. Like, I think that's just how we remember him, because it's like the final stage,
Yeah.
or it's almost the penultimate stage of Lennon, but with the final stage being more like the family guy.
Right.
But because, like, think about your life 10 years ago versus who you are now.
Sure.
Or I got into a little bit like how I used to be. And
Yeah.
quite a bridge burner.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's always good with walls though. And but I mean, a stupid joke that took me out of my thought. What I was trying to tell you is that 10 years ago, you and you now are going to be vastly different people.
Yeah.
And I would assume the same would have been true for John Lennon, certainly with the perspective on the world that he had. And I don't think he was the kind of guy who would have just gone along with whatever the society would have presented him with. I think he would have maybe changed the conversation even. So, like, you're talking about the 80s and 90s being one way. Look at the influence that he had on the 60s. Who's to say the 80s and 90s would have been the 80s and 90s that we know had Lennon still been alive?
That's an interesting point. And
The Beatles might have gotten back together in the 80s. It's possible.
I have a theory about that too, but
I'll-
go ahead.
Well, I think people evolve and change. Maybe he'd have a revolutionary podcast, if he was alive today. Like that could be cool. Like, or maybe he'd be a fucking puppet to the man. That's happened to people too, right? Like
Howard Stern certainly isn't the Howard Stern he used to be.
Right.
Yeah. So people change, they evolve. Yeah. Neil Young is someone I think who's changed, and there's times where I really disagree with his politics and times where I love his politics. But
I guess what I think is, I don't know if it's I'm not trying to say Lennon would have become too political, and what does that even mean, right? I just think the music would have not been as good. But
I don't understand where you're getting that from. Like, was the music on the decline when he died?
No, but I think because it came at the end of the 70s, and what happened to a lot of these people in the 80s is their music did suffer. Dylan,
maybe because John Lennon was killed to a large extent.
That's giving Lennon. I love Lennon.
That's
right?
how the 80s started with the assassination of Lennon. That was in 1980.
Right.
yeah,
So that kind of major cultural event in music especially would have a massive effect on music for that decade.
even people's mindsets it can affect. Like it's almost like the death of the 80s was kind of I mean, you know what I mean? Like the death of the 60s and the hippies and all that. I feel like the 80s was kind of that, right? Like they became yuppies, and they loved a lot of people who were hippies probably voted for Reagan and stuff.
Like
right?
a voice of Lennon in the mix would have totally changed the culture.
Okay. That's an interesting thought, and the reason I love this podcast and these conversations is because of this disagreement. That's interesting. So
I don't even totally disagree with you. I'm just
right.
I kind of see both.
Right.
You guys are
Okay.
saying.
Very diplomatic. Thank you.
I like that. Here's what I like about this. Like, I like the idea that Lennon would have had that much cultural influence.
Well, you yourself said he did in the 60s, right? So is the assumption that he wouldn't because the Beatles would have been broken up? Because we also just said they may have easily gotten back together in the 80s, which I'm sure probably would have happened. The three of them got back together to do those.
I mean, kind of
anthology,
kind of,
but
and not really, right?
They would have got back together.
They would have got back
100%.
together.
What year was it when they almost went on SNL? Was that 80?
75.
No, it wasn't
Yeah, I
75.
think it
Was
was.
it?
It was the episode. It was like the third episode of.
Oh, I thought
of
it was
SNL.
later in the 70s.
But-
okay.
But okay, here. All right, we'll get into this now. So, to me, the source of tension in the Beatles was not Lennon and McCartney.
It was Harrison.
It was George.
Yeah.
Really?
And
Oh yeah.
yeah, and I want to talk about George because George is my favorite Beatle,
Mhm.
and we've not talked about him enough. But that's fitting for George that we've not talked about him enough because that's George's
Yeah.
story.
Maybe try writing better songs. You ever think
How
about that, George?
How about writing some of the best songs ever and not getting to play them on Beatles albums?
By the way, plug to our show at the Zebra Room,
Yeah.
named after maybe the best Harrison album, dare I say?
The best, not just the best
Of this-
Harrison album, but the best post Beatles album that any of the Beatles created was All Things Must Pass.
Now you're
Yeah,
now
I'll
you're
go
getting
along
crazy.
with that.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll go along with that. That is, yeah, but again, like a lot of that was written while he was still a Beatle.
right.
Yeah, I think so. So we have a show at the Zebra Room called once a month called All Things Must Laugh.
Oh, nice.
There you go.
There we go.
That's
There you
awesome.
go. So if you're watching this podcast
Yeah.
and you're in LA, come out
Chris Keene will be on it at some
to the
point.
Zebra Room.
That'll be fun.
Yeah, so I mean, but George's solo stuff and Paul's solo stuff, but George's solo stuff is part of what ingratiates my Lennon theory for a bit, because I think George's stuff in the 70s is, and especially the early 70s, is great. All Things Must Pass is the first rock triple album. It's kind of a cool super group he formed for that album. Clapton on the guitar, Dylan on that album, Ringo playing drums on that. Oh, we didn't talk about also with John's stuff that John's Imagine album has George on guitar and Ringo. So it is kind of almost like a Beatles reunion without Paul, of course. But then the second album, Living in Material World, I think is great. Then
Living in a material world.
Super
I don't
spiritual.
know how you guys can not sing it all during this.
I think I mentioned this to you on the. I think I think about music more than I sing or talk about music.
Living in a material world.
It's an amazing song. I mean,
I
so many
love
songs on that
Yeah.
are great. Then, his wife leaves him for Eric Clapton, which is kind of a crazy story. And he gets into cocaine and does Dark Horse, which is not a great album. Then he does.
But the song,
Yeah, song is good.
it's great.
I am a dark horse.
Running on a dark race course.
Yeah.
I've been Nobody's joining in.
I don't know Harrison's solo shit except for All Things Must Pass.
Yeah.
And I never loved it. I don't
love
know
that.
why.
It's an amazing.
33 and
30,
third.
33 and a third came later, but next was an album called Extra Texture, which you should listen. Everyone should listen to this album because it's like his only non-spiritual album, really. It's all about the loss of Patty Boyd, his wife.
But I was going to say about 33 and a third. I think that's my second favorite Harrison album.
Okay. I'm with you. Cracker Box Palace is like my favorite, one of my favorite George. Anyways, we don't need to go through each.
Dude, we haven't
album.
even discussed the Beatles albums.
I
and
know.
We're discussing their solo
I know,
albums.
and we're so over time.
Um,
But I want to. I think this is important. We might have to make this a two-parter or something.
okay.
Yeah, we'll do a
podcast.
follow-up one.
Yeah. But what I think is about George's solo stuff and McCartney to a certain extent is that like what happened is I think they made some good albums in the 70s. You might disagree. I do kind of like some of the Wing stuff. Band on the Run's a fantastic album.
I like Jet.
One of the great songs of all time.
Mm-hmm.
But there's stuff.
I like that song a lot. That's my favorite McCartney
Yeah.
solo song. That's
There's
a great
stuff
song.
in the 80s dissipates. Now, McCartney, part of the reason McCartney's stuff is because he wanted to hitch his wagon to Michael Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
That was the future of McCartney was McCartney
And there you
Jackson.
go. He stinks up Thriller. I can't stand that.
You don't like
fucking
Girls
song.
Mine?
Yeah,
Oh,
the doggone
Thriller
girl
is so good.
mine.
Oh, you're
and then
so
his
wrong.
goofy ass comes in.
Oh my gosh.
And the record goes down for like a minute and then it comes back up.
That's
Sorry.
such a funny song.
Yeah. But
I
No,
don't understand the way you
He's so
sing.
fucking
Saying
goofy.
that
Get off the
she's not
fucking Michael
mine.
Jackson record.
Sending roses and your silly dreams, simply just a waste of time.
No.
The girl is mine.
Chris is right that we've
doggone girl is
totally
mine.
gone off from the Beatles to talk about their
Yeah.
solo discography. Anything you guys want to say about
I'm a lover now.
George's
What
stuff?
is your guys? We haven't even said what is your favorite Beatles album. Mine is Rubber Soul. How about you guys?
Oh,
wait,
Abbey
hold on.
Road.
Wait, we're not there yet.
Okay.
Oh, for
We can't. Hold on.
We just said our favorite solo album.
We've got it. We've got to get. Okay, we got to get there. We'll wrap this up in like 10 minutes. But,
Okay.
Oh, I had another question for you guys.
which is what?
Well, here's the thing with the Beatles, especially when we're talking about them like owning castles and all this shit. So like, are we just like, I don't know how to explain this. So like, you look at like a boy band now who's super lame or something that you'd make fun of maybe. I don't know if you guys would, but and some dickhead would like me. Like I don't know who's like a band like One Direction or something or NSYNC or Backstreet Boys or I don't know, like what are some I don't know what I'm trying to say. Like, are the Beatles just a lame boy band, but we're older, so they seem cool to us?
That's an interesting.
Like, if we were around then, we'd be like, look at these clowns. Like, who are these? I don't think that's
it's
true.
Interesting that you bring that up because I've heard that people say that, but
Yeah.
then I'm like, aren't most bands men or boys? Like
Right.
what makes a boy band is typically that they don't play instruments.
Yes.
And,
they don't write songs.
and often they don't write songs.
Yes.
And they're just a bunch of guys dancing around together which is what makes it seem lame to us.
Yes.
That's totally different than a band who do play instruments, do
Right.
write songs, and develop and especially evolve. We didn't really see any evolution of NSYNC or the Backstreet Boys, right?
Mhm.
Like they were that artificially manufactured product that was fed to us by the record labels, man, and then it was gone because they didn't really get to be artists.
Right.
So there's where the Beatles are incredible artists. I don't see a lot of artistry in that type of thing, you know?
Yeah, I think that is the difference. You're
When
right.
the Beatles started, their fans were almost exclusively teenage girls.
Mhm.
Now their fans are exclusively old men like us.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because they are more than a boy band, right? It wouldn't make sense if in 50 years the biggest fans of One Direction are old men. That wouldn't make
Right.
sense.
Well, it would for other reasons.
Well,
but,
old for non-sexual, you know. But what's kind of amazing about the Beatles is like there's some footage of like old Manchester U games from the 60s where everyone in the crowd is singing She Loves You. Have you seen this?
No.
Okay. It's incredible. It Ron Howard's documentary on the Beatles 8 days a week just shows this footage. It's unbelievable that the Beatles, again, this is what we talked about earlier, transcending music. It's like they were more than a band. And when you think about it that way, it makes sense. Like they were 4 teenage boys in a group, but what they did with their music and how they involved it is what really I think like
Separates the boys from the men.
separates them, right? And it does. I mean, why in 100 years we could still have this podcast?
Yeah.
All right, so I do kind of want to wrap up here, and I do want to talk about Beatles music because that's the last thing we kind of haven't talked about. It's ironic because we talked about everything but their music.
Yeah.
So let's talk about their music.
We never
though.
did talk about Ringo's solo stuff at all.
And we barely talked about Paul's. Oh, but let's talk about Paul's really quickly here. Can we talk, Daniel, you and I for a sec about Chaos and Creation?
The best Paul McCartney album of his solo career, maybe altogether.
Yeah.
I brought it up to you.
Yeah.
And you were like, yes.
Yes,
Like, and I'm like, Chaos and Creation in the Backyard is the master work of Paul McCartney that came sort of out of nowhere and then didn't like, then I was like, oh, Paul's, the next one. But Chaos and Creation, every song on there could be a Beatles song, essentially. It's just a Paul Beatles song.
It is probably the album that any of the Beatles made. That any of them made that is the closest to a Beatles album.
Mhm.
And I will give McCartney that credit.
Yeah.
I kind of like to shit on McCartney too, but he's the easiest to shit on. Because he's alive.
Yeah.
Because he lived an uncomplicated life.
Uh-huh.
Because he didn't have like this profound thing to say about politics or the world or whatever.
But I think you're belittling that there are real reasons to shit on Paul McCartney.
Okay, so
He's
those
just
would be
kind
my
of this-
reasons why I like
What
to
did
shit
I
on
get
Paul.
myself into?
But here's what I want
What
to say.
kind of podcast is this?
No, I like Paul
I'm only
McCartney,
kidding.
but
I'm-
he's just kind of
Well,
seems
Well, these
like
are two guys in
you're-
leather jackets, so we're
You're not gonna-
bad boys.
You're not going to get me to talk bad about Paul McCartney.
Here's what I want to say and about Paul and about Chaos and Creation. Why I love this album.
Yeah.
Paul later said that the thing about that album is that's the only time he had a producer that said no to him.
Mm-hmm.
Who produced it?
It was the same guy who produced REM.
Was it Brendan O'Brien? No.
You're gonna have to
I'll
look
look
up
it
his name. I'm blanking on his name right now. Are you looking up?
Oh, Nigel Godrich. He did Radiohead stuff.
Oh, Radiohead. Sorry, not
Okay.
REM.
He should
Radiohead.
only exclusively work with no people then.
So
that album is genius.
So here's my problem with McCartney, and I want to say this, Paul. I know you're listening, Paul. He's a huge fan of
he
the pod.
definitely is. He,
You
he
know.
hates me.
Yeah.
It's pretty
I like there nothing.
Yeah, it's all
a
right.
good pod. Yeah. He after he broke up with the Beatles, he refused to challenge himself with anyone, really, and that's my thing. He does the Wings with his wife, Denny Lane. Like he's not doing like Jackson was the guy to challenge him, but Jackson was doing something totally different. And then he and Jackson didn't end up working together for a lot of reasons.
What about Kanye?
But again, I don't think he would view Kanye as a competitor. Like McCartney's whole thing was, I want to tour. I want to sell out stadiums. I want to do stuff involving these other projects. He wasn't even all that interested in making studio albums. He made albums, but the complexity of them really dissipated. George and John, I think, were much more focused on the studio quality of the album than McCartney was. McCartney was concerned with, how does this album sound live? And that's why Chaos and Creation stands out, is because that's an album that stands by itself as a studio album.
Yeah.
And so what I think about McCartney is he embraces pop music conservatism extremely well, probably better than anyone. He is a
That was a very
wildly
Trumpy line. Probably better than anyone.
But he encompasses like some of the bad parts of pop music too, which is like vacant, kind of vacuous lyrics. Like that's why Smokey Robinson's amazing. It's like poetry, but it's also pop.
Yeah.
Like McCartney, like, you know what I mean? That's why people hate on Paul, I think, because he's just kind of this vacuous person sometimes. You guys don't know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about, but I think I would, and Daniel, feel free to jump in here, but I don't know if I'd call it vacuousness. I would call it more of a intentional opaqueness.
I don't think it's intentional. I think that's just who he is. He's just a simple guy. I don't think there's a lot of depth. Maybe I'm being a dick. I just don't think he has that much depth to him.
Daniel,
as a
jump
person.
in.
I don't know. I think Paul is a very professional entertainer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And he doesn't necessarily feel like he needs the drama
Yeah.
to sell the work. He's a musician and he's an artist, and
But isn't emotion a huge part of what makes music great?
well, you're making the statement that there's no emotion to Paul's work, which I disagree with, but
No, there is. But Good Day Sunshine doesn't have the same emotion as like Plastic Ono Band. You know what I mean? Anyway.
I mean, McCartney 3 is pretty emotional.
What are we're talking about his 2020 album? Like, I don't know. I see both sides of here. Where I sign it is like McCartney's focus was not on being that. He didn't try to be Smokey Robinson or Bob Dylan or whatever. He tried to be Paul McCartney.
Right.
And no one was better at being Paul McCartney than Paul McCartney. And that's where I will give him credit. And when he wants to be super talented and when he tries, he's the best. Like in the Get Back documentary, I don't know if you saw that.
No.
On Disney Plus.
Oh yeah. Of course
yeah.
I saw that.
When he makes the Get Back song by himself in the studio while John's off getting high on heroin, George is off hanging out with Bob Dylan, and Ringo's being Ringo, it's incredible. And that's the credit I'll give McCartney, is he is so naturally talented at this, and he's so good that he can sit in the studio for 20 minutes and come up with a song in 20 minutes that's better than anything John Lennon could have. It's better than anything George Harrison could have come up with.
He's like Jay Leno. He's very much like Jay Leno. Like they're amazing, and they're polished, and they're workaholics.
Yeah.
Like
That's a good point.
everything is very clean, simple,
Yes.
polished,
Yeah.
a hit.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah.
catchy.
Right.
People hate on Leno too, but I love Leno. You
Right.
know, like these guys are not emotional. There's no drama. They're just consummate entertainers. They're just really like top of the craft, obsessed with their work, and that's it. They put out the product that the people want, but they do it on such a high level that no one can touch it.
Right.
You know?
I just think it lacks depth. Both those guys lack depth. Like they're not,
You don't know them.
and they're not that.
Maybe they
I mean,
don't-
their
yeah.
work. Their work. It's not as interesting. Like I
Yeah.
think Letterman is far more interesting than Leno, even though I like Leno a lot. But Letterman is way more of an interesting comedian. Not a stand-up. Leno's a better stand-up.
Right.
But just at being an
Yeah.
interesting artist, Lennon is
Yeah.
more interesting than Paul to me. And
You know
whatever.
what McCartney quote sticks out to me a lot about this is he says, someone asked him once, what is the best part about being Paul McCartney? And his response is, everywhere I go, everyone is really happy. And of course, because everywhere he goes, everyone's like, oh my God, it's Paul McCartney.
Yeah.
He can't, well, there's a video he does with, he does carpool karaoke with James Corden. Have you seen that episode? Incredible. But it's his whole life is getting mobbed by people constantly. still to this day. And where I will defend McCartney against what you're saying is that's got to be exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be hard to constantly, wherever you go, like McCartney couldn't come here and do this.
He seems like the kind of guy that really loves that, though.
But how much of that is because he kind of has, like, what he doesn't have
some
another
people
choice?
hate that. Some people, it makes them lose their mind. You know what I mean? That's why they get into fights with photographers and,
And that's,
McCartney.
Personality. I mean, there's a lot of, you talk about the non-depth of McCartney, but there's a lot of the nuance in McCartney, like what we're talking about now, that's very fascinating.
Yeah.
I more just mean his music. No, I don't know him as a person, obviously, but yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. I'm just kidding,
Is that your Leno?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
So I don't know, man. I think there's a lot of depth in some of this stuff. It's just not lyrically, like a lot of it is musically deep, There's a lot of
The problem with well, I feel like I'm being too argumentative. I don't mean to
This
be.
is a podcast. It's called The Theory of Nothing. Fucking
Yeah.
argue, man.
But the lyrics are that they're inextricable. Is that the
Yeah, sure.
word? Yeah, like the lyrics add to the weight of the song. Like the lyrics will take away some of the weight of the song if they're just. I took a walk. It was a rainy day. Like
this
it's
is-
fucking.
You really don't like that song.
It's so
That's what I'm
stupid.
thinking.
It's so stupid.
I want to actually hold on. This is perfect. All right, because I can combine this here. This is what makes the Beatles so great. Is because when they were all working together, you got the combination
Yes,
of this.
that's why they're
so.
great,
And when we
yes.
talk about let's talk about Revolver for a second, because that you want to bring up Good Day Sunshine.
That song's fine.
Every
I'm
third
just
second. So
saying.
That song's fine.
let's bring up Revolver
It's just-
All right.
as an example.
I'm
It's
sorry.
so the Beatles. I want to talk about the Beatles music here.
He's literally just shit on that song. The entire
podcast has been Chris Keene saying he hates Good Day Sunshine.
And McCartney, and it's funny because I love McCartney.
Yeah.
I love McCartney. He's a bit of a goofball, is all I'm saying.
By the way, my favorite Beatles. One question that I don't know if we'll have time for is favorite Beatles conspiracy. But
Let me see what time it is actually.
can we do this 5 more minutes?
5 more, yeah.
Okay. Quickly, my favorite Beatles conspiracy theory is that the 4 Harry Potter houses are all based on the 4 Beatles. John is Gryffindor, George is Ravenclaw, Ringo is Hufflepuff, and McCartney is Slytherin.
Okay.
I've not heard this one.
I am going to be honest with you. I've never seen Harry Potter.
Okay.
And I've never read a Harry Potter book.
Well,
Where do you stand on trans issues, though? Where do you...
I just ignored that whole thing when it happened. And
anyways, I want to
anyway.
spend at least some time on this hour-and-a-half podcast talking about the Beatles music, which we've not talked about, but that's okay. That like, by the way, if you're listening to this, you wouldn't, but if you're listening to this and you're like, I've never heard the Beatles music, why are they so big? This is why, because we can do an hour-and-a-half on the Beatles and not talk about their music. And
And
that's how incredible they
we
are.
can do a whole another one of these,
Right.
Without even getting to the music.
That's true. But
Yeah.
let's
Should
do
we
this.
talk about their music
Yeah.
for like
So the
a little
Beatles,
bit?
the Beatles, by the way, more number 1 hits than any other band, bigger stuff than any other band. Played more a higher percentage of sold out live shows than any other band. By the way, we're the first group to come to America and refuse to play for segregated audiences, which is part of the reason why the Civil Rights Act was passed. The Beatles are actually cited in the 1968 Civil Rights Act. Beatles helped end racial segregation in America. But let's talk about their music. 13 group albums. Which is our favorite?
Well, I said Rubber Soul earlier. So
Rubber
you already
Soul.
know mine.
Why Rubber Soul?
The songs are amazing. Like they're
That's
so
gonna be
consistent.
my answer. The songs.
Well, they're all very. It's a consistent. They're all. Yeah, I don't know. I think that was their. I don't want to say peak because they're all different, but I don't know. There's this trajectory of the band from the simple rock and roll to this crazy stuff. It got more interesting later, and that's this great middle ground of the two, where it's like interesting and artful, but also it's still focused on like classic songwriting.
Yeah.
And it's just like very, very great. The songwriting on it, I think, is the best because it's not so psychedelic or out there where you're losing the songwriting aspect.
Yeah.
But it's not just plain old rock and roll like the first album.
Yeah.
So it's this great middle meeting of the two, and then they're also at the top of their game And all those people, everyone writing songs for the record, that's some of their best stuff, I think.
I feel like you could apply all those answers to my choice, which is Abbey Road. I
Yeah.
think that's
Okay.
also fair to apply what you said
Yeah.
about Rubber Soul to Abbey Road.
And my favorite's also Abbey Road. I think that's all the Beatles at their best.
Mhm.
Oh wow.
The Lennon songs come together, and I Want You So Heavy are great. Harrison's Here Comes the Sun, Something. I mean, the Something is my favorite Beatles song.
That's a really
of all
great
time. But then the medley, which was McCartney's idea, and that's what makes him genius, is the medley. What he does from "You Never Give Me Your Money" to the end of the song, to the end in Her Majesty, incredible. All right, so this is a little bit different, but like most underrated Beatles song, if that's even possible, because they're all the best. But like a deep track you like is the way to think about this.
Are there really deep tracks of the Beatles? Like,
Yeah, I mean there are in the grand scheme of things. There were songs that didn't make number ones. There were songs that didn't become
Across the
singles.
Universe, maybe? I feel like
That can be your answer, but that was a single of theirs.
I know, but I'm just saying, like, I don't know, like, for some reason people don't know that song a lot. Like, when I went to that movie Midas Man, the Brian Epstein movie.
Yeah.
They had a Beatles jam band on the roof of the hotel, and I got up and sang something, actually.
Oh, really?
And I requested to sing Across the Universe, but the band didn't even know it. And it's not the first time. For some reason, like, that's always been one of my favorite songs. And for some reason, it just hasn't.
Lennon loved that song.
Yeah.
And he was pissed at McCartney because McCartney didn't like it. He thought the lyrics were too scattered.
They're
but
odd,
yeah.
But, you know, words are flowing out like
endless rain into a paper cup.
They slither as they pass. They slip away across the universe.
Chris Keene, most underrated
That's
Beatles
a
song.
great song. Well, mine would be "The Long and Winding Road."
Okay, that was a number one hit of theirs. So I want you to choose a different answer.
"The Long and Winding Road" was
a number one hit. Yep.
Well, then mine is, I guess, would be "There's a Place."
Yeah, I was gonna say you've been talking to me about this song for weeks.
Yeah, the lyrics to that song really resonate with me.
Yeah.
Which lyrics?
"There's a Place," that song.
No, I know, but what lyrics?
Oh, it just, I don't know. It makes me think about why I love music or comedy.
I'm saying, but like, are there specific lyrics that resonate with you? And then you could say, why.
Oh, just there's a place where I can go where I feel low, where I feel blue. Like, that's how I always felt about music or now comedy. You know, it's a place where I feel comfortable or understood. Or I meet people that, we see eye to eye. It's, because I felt like a loser and a weirdo. I still do a lot of the time.
Really? That's so funny. You don't come off like you feel
really.
Like that, but,
okay.
You come across very cool, Chris Keene, on this podcast.
You seem cool, man.
I'm not cool, but yeah, I was a big weirdo. Still am. And so what always made me feel not weird was music and then comedy. Like finding something, expressing myself in that way, and finding people that can relate in that.
I've been relating to him as the normal guy on the whole time.
Well, we're crazy Beatles people. There's so many answers I could choose for this. One I'll choose, and I'm sorry, She Said on Revolver. It's the only Lennon Harrison Beatles song, which is kind of a fun fact.
I love that song.
Yeah, but there are just infinite answers to this question, to your point, and it changes based on the day. How about we end with this, because I know you have to go. We have to go because this podcast is now 17 hours long. How about we end with this here? So, because we've all kind of established, I think, who our favorite Beatles are, right? You're John, right?
I think so. I think I'm still John.
I'm George. But let's do this.
But it is close for me between John and George. And that's coming from someone who loves McCartney.
Yeah.
and I really do love Ringo too.
Right.
But it's George. It's hard for me to say because I love George so much.
Yeah.
And some days I don't want to listen to John. I just want to listen to George.
Right.
And as I've become more spiritual in my life and embraced, my religion and stuff like that, George speaks to me a lot more than John does.
Right.
But I still you can't shake your first love, you know?
Yeah.
So
Let's do this though. So the way we end every episode here is we say, "What is the theory? What is the theory of the Beatles?" That's a little tough to do with this. So let's contextualize it a little bit more. Let's each of us go around.
by the way, thank God you're articulate because you're not and I'm not. So
I don't know if it's articulate or just good at bullshitting. I guess I don't know.
you're very good at articulating your thoughts.
Well, I have a lot to say about the Beatles. I think we all do. So let's do this. So
I have great thoughts, and then they come out like an idiot. Like I'm like, oh, I'm gonna say this, and then it's like they're
Do
good.
you feel that way when you write comedy though? I bet you. I would imagine you feel like you can articulate yourself with comedy.
Well, yeah, because I have time to sit and think about it, and I run it a bunch of times.
Yeah,
and I
that's
watch
how I
it.
feel.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah.
here's what I think we've discovered today. What I think we've discovered today is that the Beatles are a constant source of discussion and entertainment. What we were all doing today here is the reason why this will always exist in perpetuity. Is we can talk about McCartney's solo discography. We can talk about Good Day Sunshine. We can talk about the Beatles buying castles. There's so many layers to this group that is so unrivaled by almost anything. And I don't just mean any band. I don't just mean like the Rolling Stones, who I didn't even want to bring them up here because they're so inferior. But the idea that this group, we only scratched the surface of this group in however long we've been talking, is why they are the best here.
Yeah. By the way, I never see the Beatles Stones comparison. I can see the Beatles, being compared to Pet Sounds. Like that. There's some competition there,
Right.
But anyway, what was the question again?
Just what did we discover today about the Beatles? What did we learn about them from this conversation?
They were all very different.
Yeah.
But dude, I think the theory of the Beatles is that they represent the wide array of human emotions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like different types of people. Like maybe that's why people argue about who's their favorite.
And the different parts of yourself.
Yeah, they encapsulate all of it just because those four guys brought such unique things all together. So that maybe that's why they were so successful, because everyone can relate to some aspect of it.
I used to go on Todd Glass's podcast all the time. He loved me to do this. If you ever notice, you'll like this because you're talking about Paul not being deep. Whenever Paul gets interviewed on like late night talk shows, it always like he pretends is this strange fake humility to what he does, or maybe it's not fake, but he goes. He always pretends like the whole thing was just such a big surprise. You've seen these, right? Where he
Yeah.
goes, we were just four boys. We were just four of us. And
That's
we
a
were-
perfect Paul. Yeah.
Yeah, and we were, we'd play our little instruments and diddly diddly dee, and then the next thing you know, we were on Ed Sullivan and doing all these things. But we were just four boys, and then he's like, I'm always pinching myself, and then I always imagine his arms are just covered in pinch marks. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's a great Paul impression.
Yeah, that's very funny.
But I just love, it's just four boys,
Yeah.
just four of them.
Well, today we were just three boys,
Yeah.
and we talked a lot about the Beatles.
Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Daniel, where can people find you?
Well, check out my podcast. It's called We Think It's Funny. I know you're going to be on. We're going to talk a little bit about the zebra.
Yeah.
And if I don't know when this comes out, but the current one that just went up is Frankie Lee, who was Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager's secretary. I know you're going to dig that.
That's amazing.
And she talks about working in NEMS and, in the height of Beatlemania.
Right.
There's some really good stories on there.
That's weird because our next episode has Jeffrey Epstein's secretary.
Yeah.
So that's going to be.
Which one ended worse?
Chris Keene, where can people find you? And maybe if you want to announce the big tour coming up too.
Oh, yeah. Chris G. Keene is me on all the platforms. I'll be on tour opening for Jimmy Dore in the Northeast, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, first week of April. Oh, and Rhode Island. I think that's it. Yeah.
And I'm just at Brian Wiora on all platforms. You can find me at the Zebra Room, my new comedy club. Daniel and I are doing a show there together.
All things must laugh.
All things must laugh.
All things must laugh away.
All right.
I could do a pretty good Harrison too.
You got it.
Yeah.
You're going to have to see it if you come to the show.
Yeah.
All right. Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.